As promised, now we're going to start to define some variables and get into some modeling. I'm sure you've been very excited and just could not wait for this video to load to get to this point. So the first variable we're going to define is one that we've talked about before, and it's very, very straightforward. I'm talking about a little thing called TR. We suppose TR stands for total revenue. So total, before we've talked entirely about costs with our last chapter. We looked at production, cost of production, challenging chapter. If you don't have that comfortably under your belt, go back and rewatch those videos. Google the costs of production economics. Look for some other videos or other sources to reinforce your understanding, because this isn't going to make a whole lot of sense, modeling anyway, without understanding that. Maybe not perfectly. You can learn a little bit, reinforce it as you go. But if you're trying to skip the cost chapter because of a time crunch or something, I don't see this working out. It's just not going to. What happens is this chapter builds right on that cost of production chapter, and this is how. That was all about costs. This chapter and the next chapter and the chapter after that are all about applying models of revenue to those same cost curves and how they interact across these different types of firms. So it's so important that you get that last chapter comfortable. Now we're on to this. TR stands for total revenue, and you might say it has a formula to remember, but it's the easiest one in the world to remember. If you sell lemonade on the side of the road and you sell lemonade for $2 a cup and you sell 10 cups, what was your total revenue? $20. What did you do there? That's it. Price times quantity is for total revenue. That's it, and that's all. So that one's a pretty easy one. People sometimes I see, they say, oh no, here he goes with the formulas again. Come on, price times quantity. That's how you get to how much money you quote unquote made. But I'm saying made because there's a difference between revenue and profit, right? So that's total revenue. Now, a similar term to what we did in the cost chapter is average revenue, which I don't spend a lot of time on this. It gives us a chance to review what we did in the last chapter. When something was average, what did that mean? What was the formula or the key to the formula if something was average? We divided by Q, right? Guess what? You can't get a deal like this in your sociology class. It's not set up so smoothly as this. I know it isn't. I've had it. So we're going to be dividing by Q. What do you suppose goes on the top? Well, if we were talking about average total cost in the last chapter, average told me divide by Q. What was the other thing that went on the top? The other thing. So guess what goes on the top? So there's your formula for average revenue, which is just your total revenue divided by your number of units. Now, that, as I said, I don't use very often. It's kind of a handy thing. That's how much is each unit bringing in. Okay, that's kind of handy. Not a decision-making variable, as I like to call the next one, and something related to this that we discussed in the last chapter. That's right, I'm talking about marginal revenue. Because rational people think at the margin. That was one of our 10 principles. And so that's what we're looking at, is how are these firms likely to behave. So we want to know marginal revenue, and we're going to be comparing that to marginal cost, which we discussed in the last chapter. Now, when we discussed marginal cost in the last chapter, what was the formula for that? Marginal meant change, right? That's how we treat marginal when we're doing these kind of computations. It just means something changing. Well, Q is still in the bottom, so it's our change in Q in the bottom, and the triangle just means the difference in the old Q from the new Q, or new minus old, is our change in Q. Okay, so that's what's on the bottom. What do you suppose is on the top? The memorization of these formulas is still the same. Marginal means we're talking about change. Q is still on the bottom, so it's change in Q. What's on the top? The other thing. So it's your change in total revenue given your change in quantity. Or put in lay terms, it's how much the next unit you produce will bring. How much the next unit you produce will bring. That's your marginal revenue. That's what that unit adds to what's called the top line, or total revenue, right? That's what it brings. So those are the formulas that we're going to need, sort of the hard formulas. And then another little one, another little facet to this is simply profit. We will abbreviate profit with pi, and I don't know why that is. I think it makes people like me look smarter because we're writing in symbols that aren't even letters. Other than that, I'm not too sure where this ever came from, and that is something we're all probably pretty comfortable with if we just let ourselves grab a hold. That is total revenue minus total cost. That's how much profit a firm is making. And I started saying individual because going back to selling our CDs, we could act as firms when we sell our CDs, right? Now, selling our CDs or our used stuff, it's very closely related to this pure perfect competition thing, right? Because I have my used CDs. I have, let me say, The Cure Disintegration on CD, not scratched, working condition. Now, I could try to list that thing on eBay for any price I might want to list it for, but there's nothing special about that specific CD, is there? I mean, compared to other CDs, it was the greatest selling CD made by that band. It was one of the bigger selling CDs of the 1980s, as a matter of fact. But within that category, myself compared to the other people who are selling that same identical CD, why would anybody pay more for mine? It's the same music. If it's in comparable condition, why would they pay more? So I would be a price taker selling that thing. That's something to try to put yourself in the shoes of the seller. So a firm might just be an individual. Another example of perfect competition is truck drivers. You get paid by some standard of mileage that you drive. Now, does one truck driver drive a better mile than another truck driver? No. So the wage that a truck driver makes by that standard of the per mile standard is pretty standard across the industry for hiring truck drivers. I said that characteristics were easy in, easy out. Getting a CDL takes some work, sure. But it's not like starting a car manufacturer. It's still easy in, easy out relative to most other types of firms, or a lot of other types of firms like that we think of that we know by name. So all that said, to come back to the simple thing that we all know, I think profit is equal to total revenue minus total cost. So now we're going to look at this kind of big picture, and then I'm going to stop this video, and then we're going to, in the next video, we're going to hone in on the individual kind of firm and the decision making that we expect the firm to do, the real model that is the heart of this chapter. But before we get there, I have this simple model where I'm going to look at this issue right here and ask you to give it some thought, and then we'll apply it to that later model. Here's the quantity that the firm might produce, and this can just be expressed in dollars. Okay, let's start with total revenue. If the firm doesn't sell a single unit, what shall be the firm's total revenue? Well, if this is 0, no matter what this is, what's that? Big fat goose egg. Okay, now, if the firm isn't going to be able to influence price, this will be fixed. As the firm increases quantity away from 0, what's going to happen to total revenue? It's going to rise. And it will rise linearly, right? Because if you go from 1 unit to 2 units, you've doubled total revenue. If you go from 2 units to 4 units, you've doubled total revenue. From 4 to 8, you've doubled total revenue. So by producing more units, the firm can produce greater total revenue, and it's just a straight line because this thing they're a price taker, so this thing is just fixed. So let me get those arrows out of our lives, just because they might be creating confusion. So total revenue, you could expect to look something like this. Now it doesn't have to, I don't know the slope of it, but it's a straight line, a linear relationship, going away from zero, right? Now total cost. We just spent a lot of time discussing total cost. If the firm produces nothing, what do they have for total cost? It's a trick question. Got to rack the brain, go back and think a little bit about what you just learned in the last chapter. If the firm produces nothing, what is total cost? Does it exist? Yes, it does. Because remember, total cost is fixed cost plus variable cost, and fixed costs are there even if you're not producing. So total cost has a positive intercept. Even when the firm is producing zero, there is some total cost that the firm is incurring. Now, as the firm begins to produce more, variable costs begin to rise and add to that total cost, right? And so we have an increase from here, some positive relationship. But as the firm produces more and more, they might be able to bid up resources, and their total costs are ultimately going to be rising something like that, right? So with this relationship, where does the firm want to produce? If they produce at zero, obviously they're not making money, so that feels wrong right there, but they're operating at a loss. Here they're operating at a loss all the way up to this quantity right here. So this is a break-even point, right? That is where they just begin to have total revenue above total cost. Total revenue minus total cost is profit. So right here is zero profit, but just right of that, I think right, this gets turned around. This is a mirror image. Just to this side of that, when I reverse this video, it's going to be turned around. Just to this side of that, I know right from left, is positive profit. Back up here is a loss again. We know we don't want to be there. What is the profit maximizing level of output that this firm wants to produce? Where is it? We know this is surviving. This is just break even. This is better. This is worse again out here. This is back to just being break even. So we must want to be somewhere in here. Where would you like to be if you're the seller, if you're this firm? You want to be where the gap is the biggest, don't you? That's profit maximization, where the gap between total revenue and total cost is the largest gap. And this is a number line, so I can't say the largest gap this way. That doesn't really make any sense. I'm asking the question, what quantity do they want to produce at to be profit maximizing? And that quantity is the one where this gap is the largest it can be, which just glancing at it looks to me to be about here. Now, how could I check that mathematically to know that that is the largest gap between these? This is something that you do in calculus or applied calculus. I don't think you do it in any algebra classes, but there is a technique. Who's got the big brain out there that can see how I could know when I have maximized or optimized this difference between these two lines? What must be true about that unique place? At this place, if I'm right, this slope right here is the same as this slope right here. Because anywhere past that, they are getting closer together. Anywhere before that, they were still getting farther apart. So the best I can do is right where they are the same slope. If you didn't know that from your calculus classes, I bet you're going, wow, that's really awesome. I did not see that coming. And when you get there in your calculus classes, now you have a little bit of an advantage. But wait, there is more. What is the slope of the total revenue curve? I put the line here. I could have put it here because this is a straight line. So it's right where these are parallel. Perhaps that's clear. What do I know about the slope of the total revenue curve? Well, slope is rise over run. So that's my change in dollars in total revenue over my change in quantity. Does that sound familiar? Should. The slope of this line is marginal revenue, because it's your change in the total revenue over the change in quantity. Isn't that neat? So the slope of the straight line is also the marginal revenue curve, or not the marginal revenue, the name of it. The slope of it is the marginal revenue. So we must be talking about where that slope is equal to the slope of the total cost curve. Slope of the total cost curve. Slope of the total cost curve. Let's think through what slope is again. Slope is rise over run. So it's the change in the total cost in dollars over the change in quantity. So it's the, I'm going to have to squeeze this in right down here. No, let me do it over here. The change in total cost over the change in quantity is the slope of this curve. Well, what's that sound like? That's marginal, oops, marginal cost. I got excited because I was already thinking to myself, profit maximization happens where these are equal. These two slopes are equal at the widest point between total revenue and total cost. That's profit maximization. That's where you want to be as a firm. So going back to something I said earlier, these are our decision-making variables because they tell us as a proprietor, where's my profit maximizing level of output? My profit maximizing level of output is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Or putting it more in like lay terms, my profit maximizing level of output is right where the next unit I produce costs me the same amount as it brings in. Because after that, the next one will cost me more than it will bring in. And before that, the one before it brought me more in than it cost. So I would go out to the very last, the very best I can do. And that is where I can just hit marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So that's the action that the profit maximizing firm is expected to take. And this is why. So going forward, we'll get into the nitty gritty where we'll look at those cost curves like average total cost, average variable cost, and marginal cost. And we're going to apply marginal revenue to that model for the profit, for the purely competitive firm. And we're going to look for the profit maximizing level of output for the firm in the short run. This piece explains why that is the profit maximizing level of output for the firm. It's because that's what profit is, and that's what the relationship looks like. And if that's what the relationship looks like, the best place to be is where these slopes are equal, and these slopes are these variables, marginal revenue and marginal cost. Again, you can't find anything this elegant in your sociology classes or your psych classes. I don't even think you can find it in your hard science classes. I don't know. I just don't think so.